Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight, the Georgia high school shooting suspect and his father appear in court. A legal expert breaks down for us the significance of the charges against them. The sentencing in former President Trump's New York case is delayed until after the election. Plus, Trump appeared in court to appeal the verdict in the E. Jean Carroll defamation case. Arlene Richards is in the studio to give us an update on Trump's legal challenges. The Harris campaign reports big donation numbers for August. How do they compare with fundraising figures from Team Trump? Jason Blair reports from D.C. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is off the ballot in Michigan and in North Carolina, where early voting was supposed to begin today. Luis Martinez has what election officials are saying. In another $250 million aid package for Ukraine, President Zelensky thanks the U.S. but says Kyiv urgently needs long-range weapons. Arian Pazdar tells us how Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin responded.
This is NTD Evening News. Live from our NTD Global Headquarters in New York City, here is Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. The latest in the Georgia high school shooting that left 4 people dead and many more injured. 14-year-old suspect Colt Gray and his father Colin Gray both appeared in court today for the first time. Colt Gray was arraigned on 4 counts of felony murder. Colin Gray was arraigned on 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter, 2 counts of second-degree murder, and 8 counts of cruelty to children. Neither entered a plea. The judge says Colt Gray could face life in prison if convicted, but not the death penalty. That's because he is under 18 years old. The judge previously said Gray could face the death penalty, but then corrected himself. The father could face up to 180 years in prison if convicted of all counts. Law enforcement also issued arrest warrants for the suspect's mother. They are for felony possession of illicit drugs and using a false license plate in November 2023. The district attorney said more charges are coming.
There will be additional charges on Colt Gray. When he was taken into custody on Wednesday, we did not have the identities or the conditions of the other victims, so we were not able to charge on those offenses. So when the evidence comes in and they've been able a chance to heal physically, emotionally, and spiritually, we will get with them, and there will be additional charges that address the other victims in the case.
NTD's Jeremy Sandberg has the update on the charges and reactions from vice presidential nominees.
The Georgia Bureau of Investigation says Colt Gray is charged with 4 counts of felony murder, 1 for each person killed at Appalachia High School on Wednesday. Investigators say Gray fired an AR-15 style rifle that his father bought him for Christmas.
These charges stem from Mr. Gray knowingly allowing his son, Colt, to possess a weapon.
That would be after authorities first contacted him and his family during a school shooting threat investigation last year.
Do you have weapons in the house?
I do.
Are they accessible to him?
They are. I mean, there's nothing loaded, but they are down.
A public records request shows the Jackson County Sheriff's Office received a tip from the FBI in May last year about a threat on the chat platform Discord to shoot up a middle school. Under Georgia law, a 13 to 17-year-old juvenile who commits a serious crime is automatically tried as an adult. The 14-year-old Gray is being held at the Georgia Department of Juvenile Justice. The agency spokesperson says he will remain there while in custody until he turns 17, despite his case being moved into the adult system. Authorities charge 54-year-old Colin Gray with 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter, 2 counts of second-degree murder, and 8 counts of cruelty to children. Democratic vice presidential nominee Governor Tim Walz reacted, campaigning in Pennsylvania yesterday.
And don't think these guys don't have plans. And I'm going to say it after what the hell happened in Georgia yesterday. They spend their time banning books instead of banning assault weapons.
Walz says he signed laws requiring universal background checks in Minnesota, as well as a red flag law. That's a rule restricting gun access for people deemed to be at a high risk of injuring themselves or others. He says those rules should become federal. GOP vice presidential nominee J.D. Vance, speaking in Phoenix, Arizona, called for more school security.
So that if a psycho wants to walk through the front door and kill a bunch of children, they're not able to.
He says as a parent he doesn't want his kids to need more security in school.
But that is increasingly the reality that we live in.
Of the 9 people injured in Wednesday's shooting, 7 of them, 6 students and a teacher, were shot. Authorities say the other 2 students suffered other injuries. All 9 are expected to make a full recovery. Jeremy Sandberg, NTD News.
Earlier, we spoke to Amy Swearer, Senior Legal Fellow at the Heritage Foundation, about the significance of the father's charges. Amy Swearer, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Now, to begin, the 14-year-old alleged shooter's father has been charged with 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter. Now, this does follow a Michigan school shooter's parents who were sentenced to 10 years in jail for not preventing their son from accessing a gun and then killing students. What precedent does this Georgia case set?
Well, I think it's important to keep in mind that we're dealing with a fundamentally different state with a different set of laws. So in some ways, this is going to be a novel case, at least insofar as this involves Georgia. So just the fact that you've had other parents in a different state charged and convicted, I think doesn't necessarily carry over. But I think, again, you look at some of the facts of this case, and it's easy to see why prosecutors are wanting to bring this, even though I think, again, this is a novel theory. This is something that hasn't been tried in Georgia before. And so I think there may be some sort of, in some sense, an uphill battle. It's not exactly clear what the state of the law is, but certainly I think there is a good argument, given some of the facts that we see in this case that are very similar to what we've seen in Michigan.
And expanding on that, given these recent moves we're seeing in Michigan and now in Georgia of holding the alleged school shooter's parents responsible, what impact might this have in stopping these things from happening in the future?
Sure. So I think one of the key pieces here is that when we're dealing with school shooters in particular, because these are minors, many of them are under the age of 18, where there's no legal way for them to procure these firearms on their own. Generally, what you're seeing is that they are getting them, I think, most often from firearms that are left unsecured by their parents. But you have seen, again, in this case and a couple of others, where parents have actually gone out of their way to affirmatively, actively procure those firearms and gift them and give unsupervised access to those firearms with respect to those kids. So I think this is, again, not just part of a national trend, but I think it's part of this national trend of trying to get parents to pay attention to these things as gun owners, to take notice that this is not something they can just flippantly disregard if their kid is going through crisis, but this is something they will be held legally accountable for if they are not going to take reasonable actions, much more so if they are going to take affirmative actions to sort of enhance access to firearms for those kids while they're in crisis.
And zooming out a bit, we've been seeing growing calls for an end to gun violence. Others are noting this is a mental health issue, or a mental health crisis, rather. How should the country approach these sensitive issues surrounding school shootings?
Well, I think it's first absolutely correct that when you look at many of these individuals, they are, if not diagnosed to be mentally ill, they're certainly not mentally stable. And so this is part of a broader conversation. And I think that's important. I think so often we as a society, we want something that has an easy solution instead of looking at comprehensive approaches that address all of these underlying factors. And I think that this happens so often in the case of gun violence. It is not just access to guns, it's who has the access to those guns. And certainly when you have, in this case, a 14-year-old who his father seems to readily admit to law enforcement within the last year that he knew he was being bullied, he knew he was struggling with his family's ongoing divorce. These are things that parents have to pay attention to, and these are things that I think need to be brought into the conversation when we're talking about gun violence, not just with respect to mass public shootings like this, which are one of the rarest forms of gun violence, but because when we're talking about things like suicide, which is 2/3 of gun deaths every year, that is certainly a mental health component. And so we can't overlook that. This needs to be part of a comprehensive approach to gun violence generally.
Amy Swearer, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
In New York, Judge Juan Merchan has delayed the sentencing of former President Trump for a second time. He said his decision best advances the interests of justice. We turn now to our legal correspondent Arlene Richards for more details on this case, as well as Trump's appeal of the E. Jean Carroll case. Arlene, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you in studio. Now, the judge decided to adjourn the sentencing until after the election. What are some of the issues he considered before making that decision?
I think there were two issues that he mainly focused on, and one was that the defense said that they needed more time to consider and assess, whether or not he would deny their other motion, which is a motion to overturn the conviction. And this came about as a result of the presidential immunity case. Now, the other issue is that they think that this public sentencing would have an impact on Trump's ability to actually continue campaigning and also impact the votes that he may get as a result of that. So they also said the prosecution didn't oppose their request for the delay, and the judge expressed reservations about, granting it. But ultimately, he realized that going forward with the sentencing would compromise his own credibility as a fair and impartial judge. And he was also concerned that going forward with the sentencing would appear as if he was attempting to interfere directly with the election. So he has adjourned the other motion until November 12th, and he has adjourned the actual sentencing until November 26th.
And also today, there were oral arguments on Trump's appeal of the first E. Jean Carroll case, in which a jury awarded her $5 million. That's related to her claim that Trump raped her. Now, Trump was in the courtroom and he held a press conference after the hearing. What are some of the arguments his attorneys gave for Trump seeking a new trial?
Well, his attorneys had to argue this before a three-judge panel. And going into this, they already expressed some skepticism. And actually, one of the judges said that he thought it would be very hard to actually give Trump a new trial or to overturn the jury's decision. And the other thing is that the attorneys for Trump argued that this case was another election interference case. And they also said that there was an error below because the judge below allowed in certain evidence that he shouldn't have. And that is that there were these two women who also testified that they had been sexually assaulted by Trump. And the other was this Access Hollywood tape in which he is heard saying that he grabs women's private parts. Now, Trump has said repeatedly that he does not know Ms. Carroll, and he talked about that earlier today in the press conference. So let's listen to that.
So I didn't show up, and I was found guilty of something that I didn't do with a woman that I have never seen, touched, or in any way was involved with, nor would I want to be. I would not want to be. My people say, please don't say that. I would not want to be involved with her.
And he also said that this photo that's been going around showing him and Ms. Carroll side by side or in the same photo was probably or could have been AI generated. But he said even if it's real, he still doesn't know her.
And Arlene, as for the other two cases in D.C. and Georgia, what's their status?
Well, the D.C. election case has been reactivated since this presidential immunity ruling in which the judge sent it back down to Judge Chutkan and asked her to decide whether or not the acts are either presidential or not presidential. Now, she has prepared an extensive order in which she has given them deadlines on when they have to submit their papers and their arguments about those two acts and how to separate them out. Now, Smith has already filed a superseding indictment, and that indictment, he changes some things. In that indictment, he refers to Trump as a presidential candidate rather than as the incumbent president. He also kept the same 4 counts but deleted references to conversations with members of his staff, except for Vice President Mike Pence. Now, the judge says she's expecting appeals on both sides on this, so she is not rescheduling the trial, and which probably won't happen until after the election. Now, the Georgia case is on hold until after until after the election. Actually, the appeals court has decided to put it on hold, and this is the appeal to decide whether or not Fani Willis should be disqualified. They're not going to hear that until after the election. And then in the Florida case, that case actually has been dismissed, but Jack Smith has already appealed it, but it's not clear when that appeal will be heard. So Trump is free to continue going forward with his campaign, and I don't think that any of these cases will be a significant interference with that.
Quite a lot of updates, Arlene. Thank you.
Thank you.
The Harris-Walz team says it raised a total of $361 million in August, and they haven't been shy about pointing out that that's almost triple what the Trump-Vance campaign says it raised during the same period. NTD's Jason Blair brings us an update.
The Harris-Walz campaign is calling it the, quote, best grassroots fundraising month in presidential history. They've announced that nearly 3 million donors contributed in August alone, and that 95% of those donations were under $200. The Harris team also says that their data shows more than 60% of their August donors were women, and almost a fifth were registered Republicans or independents. They say they have $404 million currently on hand, and that they've raised a total of $615 million since the beginning of the Harris presidential campaign. The Harris-Walz campaign managers said in a statement Friday, as we enter the final stretch of this election, we're making sure every hard-earned dollar goes to winning over the voters who will decide this election. Former President Trump's campaign announced on Wednesday that they've raised $130 million in August and have a total of $295 million on hand. Both campaigns have been hitting battleground states with hundreds of millions of dollars worth of paid TV and digital ads. Harris's team announced a $370 million buy running from Labor Day through November 5th. For the upcoming debate in Philadelphia, Kamala Harris is preparing by staying in Pittsburgh. Lawyer Karen Dunn is heading the vice president's prep plan. Dunn has a long list of high-profile clients in this area, including Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. She has trained Democrats for debates in every election in the past 16 years. Trump, on the other hand, has not announced any formal debate preparation plans. He's remaining active on the campaign trail with press interviews and event appearances on his schedule. Jason Blair, NTD News.
Speaking of the debate, Harris and Trump will be facing off next week in Philadelphia. NTD will have on-the-ground coverage, in-depth analysis, and a lot more prepared for you during our pre- and post-debate show on The Nation Decides 2024, presented by Steve Lance and myself. Make sure to tune in next Tuesday, September 10th at 8 p.m. Eastern. Former independent presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has now made it off the ballot in Michigan and North Carolina. NTD's Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has more on North Carolina, where early voting was supposed to start today.
A North Carolina Court of Appeals barred the state board elections from sending out ballots that listed Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as a presidential candidate. 125,000 ballots were slated to be sent out this Friday.
By being on the ballot, many voters will think Kennedy wants the North Carolina presidential electors, when in fact he does not. So it's not the Elections Board job to sow confusion in this matter. It's their job to eliminate it.
The North Carolina State Board of Elections initially rejected the request to remove Robert F. Kennedy Jr. from the ballot, arguing that changing the ballot would delay the process of sending them out by September 6th, as stipulated by law.
Our state election officials have diligently gone to these admirable lengths to ensure that voters across the state will receive their ballots when they expect, on time, and enjoy the full 2 months for voting mandated by the state's law.
North Carolina State Board of Elections also argued that RFK Jr. was vague about his request to be removed from the ballot, citing comments he made when he suspended his campaign.
My name will remain on the ballot in most states. If you live in a blue state, you can vote for me without harming or helping President Trump or Vice President Harris. In red states, the same will apply. I encourage you to vote for me.
RFK Jr. won a second appeal on Friday to be removed from the ballots in the state of Michigan. The former presidential independent candidate is also suing to be removed from the ballots in the state of Wisconsin.
In about 10 battleground states where my presence would be a spoiler, I'm going to remove my name, and I've already started that process and urge voters not to vote for me.
According to the latest polls, Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump are tied at 48% in North Carolina. Those 16 electoral votes are considered a toss-up. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
Michigan plans to appeal the decision. The U.S. is pledging another $250 million in weapons for Ukraine. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin made the announcement at a gathering of allies today. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pastar has the latest and a warning. The following report contains footage some viewers may find disturbing.
Time is of the essence, especially with winter on its way. And we must all step up our support and quickly.
Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin announced another $250 million aid package for Ukraine on Friday. He made the announcement at a gathering of allies at an airbase in Germany.
This coalition of some 50 nations of goodwill stands united and firm. And today we'll push even harder to step up our support for Ukraine.
Austin says the new aid will be delivered quickly. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky also attended the gathering of defense ministers. Allies don't allow Ukraine to use long-range weapons against Russia. Zelensky once again asked them to change the policy.
We think it is wrong that there are such steps. We need to have this long-range capability not only on the occupied territory of Ukraine, but also on the Russian territory. Yes, so that Russia is motivated to seek peace.
Zelensky previously said that Ukraine needs long-range capabilities to destroy weapons stored deep inside Russia. After Friday's gathering, Lloyd Austin was asked why the U.S. doesn't allow Ukraine to use long-range weapons.
We said all along that there's no one capability that will in and of itself be decisive in this campaign.
Austin added that allies had a similar opinion when Ukraine asked for tanks and some other things. He said no single capability will decide the war. In Ukraine, meanwhile, hundreds of people attended a funeral in Lviv on Friday. 7 people died after a Russian attack on Wednesday. 4 of the 7 were all members of the same family, a mother and 3 daughters. The father, whose face is still showing signs from the explosion, is the only one who survived. Russia repeatedly denied targeting civilians in its attacks. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
U.S. and Palestinian officials confirmed an American activist was fatally shot during a recent protest in the West Bank. 26-year-old Yagi was taking part in a weekly demonstration against an Israeli settlement located near a Palestinian village. The Israel Defense Forces issued a statement saying it responded with gunfire towards someone who they say posed a threat. U.S. Ambassador to Israel Jack Liu says officials are collecting more information about the deadly incident. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Telegram founder Pavel Durov speaking out for the first time since his arrest. He calls France's charges against him misguided. Here's the latest.
Telegram founder Pavel Durov says the French police interviewed him for 4 days. He says they told him he may be personally responsible for other people's illegal use of Telegram. He says French authorities say they didn't always get a response when they contacted Telegram. Durov denies that Telegram refused to cooperate with European authorities, adding that the platform removes millions of posts every day. He says Telegram is absolutely not some sort of, quote, anarchic paradise. Late last month, French police stopped him when his plane landed at this Paris airport for a fuel stop. He was charged with facilitating criminal activity on Telegram and not responding to authorities. Durov says normally a country would take legal action against the platform itself instead of arresting the founder. Durov says he was surprised to be arrested. Durov is a French citizen, but he was born in Russia. Russian President Vladimir Putin was asked about the arrest.
I don't understand the actions of the government.
Putin says Russia is also concerned about criminal activity on Telegram, but he says other platforms also have these problems. Durov says only a small percentage of Telegram's users are criminals, adding the platform is committed to making sure its moderation efforts are praised instead of criticized.
One of the most powerful storms of the year has slammed into the Chinese island of Hainan. It's the strongest typhoon to make landfall there in 10 years. Packing maximum wind speeds of over 140 miles per hour, Typhoon Yagi is the equivalent of a Category 4 hurricane. Over 1 million people have been evacuated. Schools are shut down and flights have been canceled. Residents are asked to stay home. Public transportation has been halted. Neighboring provinces have activated their highest level of emergency response. Officials are warning local residents of potential floods and landslides. Heavy rain is set to continue until Sunday. Parts of Hainan could see over 20 inches of rain per day. The typhoon is expected to move to northern Vietnam on Saturday. Americans adopt more kids from China than from any other country in the world. It's been that way for the last 20 years, but that's about to change. China is shutting down its foreign adoption policy after 32 years in action. Beijing announced the decision yesterday. Beijing added that the only exception to the rule will be for children with blood relatives who live overseas. China's first foreign adoption happened back in 1992. But after a surge in the late 90s and early 2000s, the number of Chinese children adopted by American families declined by over 75% from 2010 to 2019. China suspended foreign adoptions in 2019 when the COVID-19 pandemic first broke out. Although Beijing later resumed international adoptions in late 2022, only 16 Chinese children had received U.S. visas as of last September. That's only about 2% of 2019's total, which totaled about 820. Turning to the situation inside China, the country is grappling with an aging population. Fewer couples are having babies, largely citing social and financial pressures. The most populated town in China reported that over 50 kindergartens had shut down as of August. And it reflects a nationwide trend. China closed over 5,000 kindergartens 2 years ago. Many Chinese people who work in the early education industry are struggling to find jobs, with some considering changing their careers. Zooming back out, it's worth noting that the U.S. adopts more foreign-born children than any other country, while China is at the top of the list for adopting out kids to other countries. According to the U.S. Bureau of Consular Affairs, data from 1999 to 2022 shows that over 8,200 Chinese children were adopted by American families. That accounts for nearly 30% of all adopted foreign children in America. The U.S. labor market picked back up in August after a surprisingly weak jobs report the month before. According to data released today by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, employers added an estimated 142,000 jobs last month. That marks stronger growth than July's worrisome low number of 89,000 jobs. Job gains in August inched the unemployment rate down from 4.3% to 4.2%. The month's total is lower than what economists expected, but it's in line with the job growth seen in the past 3 months. And joining us now to analyze the jobs report is Julia Pollock, Chief Economist at ZipRecruiter. Julia, thank you so much for joining us. Great to see you here. Now, to begin, break down for us the jobs report and what this means in terms of the job market and the state of the economy.
Sure. So many observers are saying that this was a reassuring report and that it was stronger, that the labor market picked up. But I don't think that's exactly the case. Unemployment was basically flat in this report. It moved from 4.25% to 4.22%. So the change really was just a matter of rounding. The underemployment rate, the expanded definition of unemployment, actually rose, showing continued hardship for job seekers in the market. And then job gains, while that number 142,000 is relatively strong, there have been downward revisions month after month after month. And those downward revisions to the prior 2 months totals were large, totaling 86,000. So over the past 3 months, job growth has slowed and households are feeling it.
To your point, the jobs report shows full-time employment plummeting by over 400,000 and part-time jobs increasing by 527,000. What does that tell you?
So I think, the problem in this report is that it wasn't just voluntary part-time employment that rose, but involuntary unemployment. So right now, about 3% of workers who are employed are working part-time only because they can't find the full-time hours that they want. And that's the highest rate since 2021. It shows that workers' demand for work is cooling, and workers are struggling to get the kinds of jobs that they want.
Now, August job gains were mostly in healthcare and other government-funded agencies. What does that mean in terms of market growth? Is that a sustainable trend?
So outside of healthcare. Private sector hiring has become unusually slow. Just this past month, only 74,000 jobs were added in the private sector outside of healthcare. That's about half the usual monthly pre-pandemic rate. And over the past 3 months, that average has been even worse. It's been around 30,000, which is way below the 137,000 monthly average between 2015 and 2019. So the private sector has cooled a lot. It'll likely continue to do so if monetary policy remains this tight. That said, the Fed has basically announced that help is on its way and that it'll take its foot off the brake pedal and allow the economy to move forward again.
Speaking of the Fed, reports indicate that the Fed Reserve could start cutting rates in September to stimulate the economy. How does this new jobs report factor into the Fed's calculation on how much to cut, and how much of an impact will that have?
So even before this report, markets were pricing in several cuts. This report, I think, only adds evidence that the time is here.
Julia Pollack, Chief Economist at ZipRecruiter, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
President Biden paid a visit to Ann Arbor, Michigan today. He talked about his Investing in America agenda and signed an executive order aimed at helping middle-class workers. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has more from the White House.
President Joe Biden signed an executive order at a training facility in Ann Arbor, Michigan today. Now, the Good Jobs order aims to boost labor contracts and provide benefits such as health insurance and child care. It directs federal agencies to prioritize this when giving out project grants.
Kamala and I are setting a policy across the board in the support of good job standards. And from this point onwards, any president who disagrees with that is going to have to say so out loud, say it to your face, and repeal that order. And I want to see them try to do it. Not only did the middle class build America, you built the middle class. That's a fact. Labor unions built the middle class.
Now, this follows Vice President Harris rallying in Detroit, Michigan on Labor Day. Biden last visited the state in July, just over a week before dropping out of the race and endorsing Harris. Now, this all highlights the influential role that unions have in the presidential election. Former President Donald Trump has seemingly won over the support of many union workers, but as far as union leaders, they've historically supported the Democratic ticket. But in a very uncommon move, Teamsters President Sean O'Brien spoke at the Republican National Convention, but not at the Democratic National Convention. But the Teamsters have not endorsed a candidate. Biden's visit to the swing state of Michigan is his latest stop in his Investing in America series, where he highlights his administration's investments in infrastructure. On Thursday, President Biden was in the town of Westby, Wisconsin, where he announced $7.3 billion in new investments into electricity in rural areas to bring down the price there. Reporting from the White House, Jack Bradley, NTD News.
Lawmakers recently visited the southern border to get a closer look at the problems facing immigration. They held a hearing on Friday to share testimony about the impacts on California's residents and communities. NTD's David Lamb reports.
Witnesses testified today on what they've seen as a result of people coming through the U.S.-Mexico border. Individuals, including California officials, spoke before the House Judiciary Committee. The focus was on the flow of fentanyl, people circumventing legal ways to enter the U.S., missing children, and human trafficking.
The failure to control the illegal border crossings and address the influx of fentanyl into the U.S. is taking a devastating toll on people of Riverside County.
The Riverside County District Attorney said counties are affected by drug trafficking and the impact of increased immigration. He's calling for stronger border control. In 2021, the DEA said 4 out of 10 fake prescription pills tested had a lethal amount of fentanyl, a painkiller that's 100 times stronger than morphine. That number is now 7 out of 10 pills.
Fentanyl production begins in Mexico, where it's manufactured by Sinaloa and Jalisco cartels in covert, unsanitary labs. The cartels are expanding their marketing of fentanyl to children via social media apps. They produce counterfeit pills, and they're lacing all other drugs in Riverside County with fentanyl.
We're also dealing with high rates of crime,
Statistics on crimes committed by illegal immigrants in California are not available because, unlike in Texas, California state policymakers refuse to allow our local law enforcement to collect these data. We must always be a nation that honors our heritage as a land of immigrants, but also one that expects everyone in our society, including newcomers, to abide by our laws equally. I call today on President Biden and Vice President Harris to enforce and uphold our border, to secure our border, and enforce our laws for the safety of our community.
U.S. government policy at the border is facilitating a multi-billion-dollar smuggling operation by the cartels. The cartels are not simply providing transportation for a cost. They're sexually assaulting women and children, and they're taking the lives of people without any fear of retribution.
The border security advocate said his team found an abandoned cell phone at the border.
We accessed the cell phone and discovered it was from someone who traveled from Wuhan, China to San Gabriel, California. I found around 40 different chat groups via an app on the phone that provide instructions on how to get smuggled into the U.S. The most prominent chat groups are Chinese, but my team has infiltrated Russian, Ukrainian, Azerbaijan, and other Middle Eastern chats as well. The chats do not stop. They run 24/7.
The advocate raised concerns about how children are coming across the border with adults who they are not related to. In August, Homeland Security reported that over 300,000 illegal immigrant children are unaccounted for in the U.S.
I would just say we need to reinstitute Title 42. We need to reinstate MPP. We need to make sure ICE is actually removing the 1.5 million people who have had due process.
The House Judiciary Committee will meet again to prepare a report based on the multiple hearings, including today's testimonies. In San Jose, California, David Lamb, NTD News.
Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer, and now for your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, a lot going on today, but let's start with last night's game between the Chiefs and Ravens as the potential game-tying touchdown was overturned on replay with no time left. What was the Ravens' reaction?
Well, their quarterback, Lamar Jackson, said right after the game that he thought it was a touchdown, saying, quote, "I still think it's a touchdown," which maybe implies he saw the replay. I'm not actually sure. It was undoubtedly a heartbreaking way to end the game for them. Jackson had just missed an open receiver in the end zone the play before, but then in the final play, he hit tight end Isaiah Likely for what was initially ruled as the game-tying score. But as soon as they showed the replay, we all knew it would be overturned. The very tip of his show was just on the line, which is out of bounds. Now, that said, the Ravens, they certainly had a right to be upset about the officiating, overall. I mean, there were several false starts I saw in the Chiefs that somehow weren't called. Meanwhile, they got multiple infractions for illegal formation, which is a point of emphasis this year for the referees, but the Chiefs somehow didn't get any of those penalties. And then there was that crucial timeout at the end of the first half that looked like it was called by the Chiefs defensive coordinator, but only the head coach is actually allowed to call timeout. I'm not sure how that actually happened. So plenty of controversy already, and we've only played one game.
Well, the second game is tonight with the Eagles playing the Packers in Brazil. Now, this is one of the 5 NFL games to be played overseas this year. Do you think the league is looking to possibly add teams in other countries in the future? And what is their interest there?
I think that's part of it. It's actually more logistically possible for the NFL to do this than, say the NBA or Major League Baseball, because the NFL only plays once a week. So you can at least travel during the week and maybe practice there and then come back. But I think this also could be timed with the bye week for when you do have to travel back. And the owners would certainly welcome a European or South American group of investors paying a multi-billion-dollar franchise fee. On the flip side, though, I really don't see players wanting to live over there. Now, a secondary reason is to get more TV media deals overseas. The NBA reportedly gets hundreds of millions of dollars through their media deals with Chinese companies, though it seems like it hinges on everyone in the league, being quiet about the human rights violations that happen over there. But the extra money it brings in, any league wants that.
Well, looking at college football this weekend, the big matchup seems to be Texas playing the defending champion, the Michigan Wolverines. Yet the Longhorns are favored on the road by a touchdown. What gives?
There's a lot of questions about Michigan right now. Obviously, they had a great season last year. They won it all. Really, the last 3 years, 3 straight Big Ten titles. They went 40-3 overall, but they just lost 13 players to the NFL, including their quarterback. plus their head coach Jim Harbaugh, who's now coaching the Chargers. Now in his place is Sherrod Moore, who just coached his first game, so it's really not a lot known about him. Texas, on the other end, they come off a 12-win season where they won their conference. They returned their starting quarterback, Quinn Ewers, who's one of the best in college football. So they're a touchdown favorite, which on the surface seems a bit generous, but I do see why. I mean, this looks like, though, this was going to be a highlight game for the weekend.
Shifting gears to tennis, we have the men's U.S. Open semifinals going on today, including an All-American matchup tonight. Meanwhile, the women's final set is for tomorrow. What are the odds an American wins both?
I mean, not great, but they'll definitely have the crowd behind them for sure in both matches. You know, whoever wins the All-American match tonight between Frances Tiafoe and Taylor Fritz is going to have to face #1 ranked Jannik Sinner, who just dispatched Jack Draper just a few minutes ago. Very impressive fashion. But at least one American man is going to reach the final. Now, the women's side is 6th ranked Jessica Pegula. Now, she'll face 2nd ranked Aryna Sabalenka. Now, this is almost a toss-up. I mean, Pegula was very impressive at beating Iga Swiatek, who's a number one ranked women's player in the world. That was on Wednesday. On the other hand, though, for Sabalenka, this is her 2nd straight U.S. Open final. This is her 4th straight time to get the semis here. She's really chomping at the bit. All in all, there's a decent chance that happens for both. I think at least one of them gets it, although I don't know which one.
Well, Dave, as always, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you, too.
And that is all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.